So welcome everybody to the first of 4 sessions, Life Everlasting. Today we're going to take a look at death and what we think of when we think of death and heaven, so on, and how it's shaped by culture, even some of our our theological beliefs and things like that. Well, so we'll have a chance to see kind of what the Bible says. So I've got a PowerPoint that I'm putting together, and I'm gonna share my screen now. And so the people at home are seeing the PowerPoint screen. Those of you are seeing the PowerPoint on the TV by me. And so right now, I don't see anybody else in our Zoom, but you won't see yourselves, at least while I have the slides up. So, if you like to see yourself in there, sorry about that. So, yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? When you're looking at yourself, you have to kind of get used to that. So yeah, we're gonna have 4 weeks just to give you an outline of the class. 4 weeks. Like I said, today we're looking at the changing views of death and dying, and have kind of a discussion around that, taking Easter off. And then on the 16th, we have people, a group of people from the volunteer hospice that are coming to present to us a little bit about what hospice does, and to talk about advanced directives and living wills and those types of things. Then I'm trying to remember, Stan, are you the next week or the last week?
No, I think it's next week.
You're the week after that, yeah. So on the 23rd, then Stan's going to be talking about grief and loss. And then I'll come back at the last one of the month on the 30th. We're going to have a chance to look at the funeral service and just kind of walk through what that represents and so on. Some of you maybe have done that sort of planning before. Anyway, I just kind of like going through there and seeing what our theology sort of in action. So that's kind of an overview of what we're going to be looking at. So today, the slideshow is really meant to, or the PowerPoint is really kind of meant to give us some things to sort of think about a little bit, and kind of a discussion starter. So I'm just going to go to the first slide here. The question: where are bodies buried? What do we call these places? It's not a trick question necessarily. It's a very simple question. Where are bodies buried?
Cemeteries.
Cemeteries. What else?
Graveyard.
Mausoleums, graveyards. What are some other names?
Ashes.
Crypt, yeah.
Well, no, that's Spring of Ashes.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, right, ashes. And there's some names. I don't have them listed on here, but there are some names for like a niche maybe, or columbarium and so on, right, for depositing ashes, interring them. There's some other names for where bodies are buried.
Underneath the Jersey Turnpike.
Yeah, in some mob areas, yeah, Hoover Dam, under the Turnpike. Davy Jones Locker. Well, here's a few things that I came up with. See how we did. Graveyard, crypt. What's a crypt? Generally.
It's like a room.
Okay. And like if you go to Europe and you're visiting, going from town to town, what do you normally go to in villages and cities in Europe? Sightseeing.
In the church.
Go to the churches.
Yeah.
There are crypts where there are bodies that are buried somewhere beneath the church. I don't know that you see that very often in the United States, but it's more common there. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Cemetery, I think I heard already. Churchyard. Yeah, you ever heard that expression? We'll see a picture here in a little bit. Boneyard. Potter's Field. What's a Potter's Field?
Poor people.
Poor people are buried. Yeah. Memorial Garden. And you'll see that there's some Memorial Park. So there's some names that what we call these places change, and that says something about our attitudes about death and dying as well. We'll have a chance to talk about that some more. God's Acre. Have you heard of a God's Acre? I'll show you a picture of a God's Acre here in a little bit. Grave, tomb, catacomb, mausoleum, and ossuary. Ossuary, I'll show you a picture of that and explain that here in a minute. All right. So here, I hope you can see those pictures okay. So I pulled up some colonial Puritan iconography that you'd see, like if you went to a cemetery in or churchyard in Boston, for instance, or Salem. I think some of these are from Salem as well. You'll see these kinds of images on headstones. So in the upper left is a winged cherub. Actually, if we kind of go backwards in time, the earlier ones would be like the one in the upper right. That's called a death's head. What is that exactly? What do you see there? Skull. Well, it's not crossbones. Skull and wings. Yeah, yeah. And then below that is a skull. Yeah, skull and crossbones. And then on the lower left, next to the skull and crossbones, what's that image there? An hourglass. Yeah. So what do you think what do these images tell us, by the way, about attitudes about life and death? You're walking through a cemetery, churchyard, and so on, you can see these.
You're running out of time. You leave us soon.
Yeah, there's very much a sense of mortality. Yeah.
You come to an end.
You come to an end. You might think of like, from ashes you came, right? To ashes you shall return, or something like we say it, or dust you came on Ash Wednesday.
Well, the wings seem to imply that either an angel comes or we ascend to heaven.
Yeah, the wings do, yeah, they do indicate that, something about ascending into heaven or some sense of everlasting. And that if you compare the two pictures there, the upper ones, which one looks more inviting? The first one, probably on the left, yeah.
No, the hourglass guy is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, he seems like he knows what's up.
So the cherub one is a little bit later image. So the Puritans had much more of a sort of a stark, with this puritanical, if you will, kind of look at death and dying, and so hence the skull and crossbones and your mortality. They were reminders that life is finite, and with it, I think, is an implicit message of you better get your life in order, to some extent of what. And later, the image of the everlasting with that cherub and so on, it has a softer sort of feel to it. It's not as much about death, but about maybe a transition or some sort of going off into eternity. But the images on headstones do tell us a lot about what about faith, what we value, and things like that. Just as funeral customs have for since people have been around. We learn a lot about cultures that maybe we know nothing else about, except we can see how they buried their people, and what did they put with them, and so on. And as I was reading up a little bit about this, that the idea of headstones date back about 3,000 years or so to the Egyptians. So that's been around for a while.
Well, one of the thoughts that crossed my mind when I saw the wings there is that there's a lot of people that believe that when you die, you become
an angel, right? Yeah.
which is certainly a false. Anyway, I mean, it makes me think back to the book that Billy Graham wrote about angels,
Uh-huh.
and talking about how that was a common belief that was certainly not supported by scripture.
Yeah, we'll see. There are a lot of things, those sort of mythologies that we have around death and dying. They bring us some comfort, but they may not be particularly scriptural. So. Here's a picture of a couple churchyards from back east somewhere. I don't think I put down the locations here. What's that?
You put the pictures up and the bell started going.
Oh, yeah. The room, the bell.
For whom the bell tolls.
Yeah.
Well, that's a favorite.
What'd you feel about walking through a churchyard like that, graveyard, on your way to worship?
Cool.
Cool.
It's a reminder of the saints that went before.
Yeah, reminder of the saints that went on before us.
Common in Europe, I think.
Well, certainly in older places.
The Presbyterian Church at Neo Bay has a churchyard right outside there.
Oh, really? That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Their headstones were not, I don't remember very many stones, they're almost all cedar planks.
Yeah, that's another thing that's interesting too, is there's always been sort of an industry around death, whether it's the mortician or the grave diggers, the stone cutters and so on. And that some of the older stones that they use, like slate and so on, that they were just handy in the places where they were. But as they discovered like granite and ways to mine that basically, or cut that, and other materials, they became, more, granite's a little, you could probably, tell us more about the geology of things, but.
Granite is harder, a lot of, in the Midwest, there's a lot of the old gravestones are limestone, but then they dissolve.
Yeah.
But people use what was available.
Well, this is sure a reminder for me of the finiteness of life, like life is short.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to probably, think through it a little bit. I don't know, our initial reaction, if you're, if you go to a mega church someplace, do you want to see a few acres of headstones around the church? Or would you rather see like a parking lot, playground, or, that kind of stuff?
I would imagine a lot of cities would have issues with that too.
Yeah, there's that too, right? So those are all things that, we'll talk about how they change. But I think part of it is that, I don't know, I think if we polled 100 people at random, what they would think about having a graveyard around a church, I would think that a good majority of them would think that that's sort of morbid or something like that. So cool. Well, and I think if, depending on our understanding of death and things, I think there is something that's
Because
kind of
it
neat about it.
really just shows connection with your past.
And that's what it was for.
Well, and imagine if you lived in one place all your life and you worshiped at one church from birth to death.
Right.
There you are, close to your church.
Right.
Well, and by not having it there, are you just culturally, we are afraid of death and dying, and so is that just because we don't want to look at it?
Right.
We don't want it
Yeah.
in front of our face.
Yeah. And that's what's happened kind of over time, is that we have found a way to push death off.
Well, the whole idea of cremation is almost the next step in that direction. Just the idea that the ashes go away so quickly and so easily as compared to burying the body.
Well, there were also sanitation issues related to cremation.
Well-
It's definitely safer for your water supply
Okay.
to cremate rather than, because that can create issues if you're a well with cholera and other problems.
But
Yeah,
also, it's
absolutely.
a space and environment issue. Like
Yeah.
in Europe, a lot of the cemetery plots are really, really old, and they will have like, I don't know if it's called a crypt or what, but it's outside, but the family will have buried people in the same place, and I think they're cremated now and put there, but the family name is on there, and there's some other, sometimes there's, I don't know, something. It looks like somebody's buried in there, but it's above the ground, but I mean, after a while, they run out of space, so where are they supposed to, where are people supposed to go?
Right.
So they may be cremated and then their name is added.
There's a lot of talk now in the news about human composting.
Oh, yeah, but there's getting a lot of traction.
Yeah.
It's an interesting option.
In Haiti, often when you go out in the country, each family has a cemetery in their own on their own property. Their loved ones are buried there. I'm not sure what happens if you have to sell the house.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But take it with you.
Chris's family back in Pennsylvania still has the family farm and their own cemetery on.
Oh, wow, okay.
So there's this cemetery in California where a whole bunch of my relatives are buried. And I was just thinking, all of the adults are buried underground, but any of the children who died are in, what do you call it? We call it when it's a box in a wall. So it's almost like maybe the parents were unwilling to put their child under the ground, you know? I don't know.
Well, there are also sky burials that are practiced in the Himalayas, where you take the body out, you bring a sledgehammer with you. It's the only tool that you need, and you break up the large parts and let the birds take it. And then the idea is you're sort of surrendering yourself to the sky, which is kind of cool when you think about it too. Messy, but cool.
Would be.
So a lot of the headstones out there at Needham Bay are children. And they, you can tell easily because they have the birth date and death date. But a lot of them are from when they were having disease that we brought from overseas that really took out a lot of their tribe. And it's very, and it's quite a statement there in their churchyard.
I mentioned God's Acre earlier, and here you go. So this is Winston-Salem, North Carolina. God's Acres are a part of the Moravian tradition, which I think Moravians are sort of a Methodist kind of strand. Does that sound about right? Or
I think they're offshoot
Or
even out of
Baptist.
Luther.
Luther, or Lutheran?
I think.
Something,
I
okay.
think so.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
But what's interesting is, yeah, these God's Acres, they bury their dead sequentially. But rather than buried, or chronologically, I guess maybe a better way to say it. So rather than being, buried to, how do you decide if you've remarried? Who you buried with, family plots and things like that. They take all the, it just whoever the next person is, they occupy the next space. And if you walk, you walk down and you look at these, you'll see you'll see that, the data is by date of death. They just kind of go in order. What do they look like? Buttons? Keyboard kind of? What else?
Stepping stone.
Stepping stones. Well, think of the name, God's Acre. Now think of what it looks like.
Plants.
Yeah, or like seeds. Like if you're planting a row, right, a row of crop, you would just kind of, space them out and go on down. And that's kind of the idea, that they're sort of, the body is like a resurrection seed, waiting the day of resurrection, and they will all be raised from the dead, in that spot. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of concept. Yeah.
It's always been interesting to me to go to old graveyards to find out what was the oldest grave there.
Yeah.
Here it would be very easy to find.
Right, yeah, it would be easy to find. And what else does it say? What's the other statement this makes?
It's the statement of hope.
Okay, statement of hope, yeah, definitely,
We
right.
are expecting to be resurrected, and this means we can just kind of pop right up. It's
it's also kind of a uniformity, everybody's the same.
Mhm.
Everybody
Right,
has the
Yeah,
same
Yeah.
stone and.
Yeah, so, yeah, everybody at that point is the same. You know, I've done, you know, countless funerals, and, you know, I've seen how families approach making those decisions for, you know, their loved one. And, you know, what that means, that some, you know, some go all in, and others go for something more simple, and, I mean, it really, and the idea here that everything is just equal, everyone is equal. I really like that.
Yeah, in Iowa, where my family's from, the cemetery up there, it's all in family plots. And there are these big, huge things in the center of the family plot for people that have the money to buy them. And I hadn't thought about that so much. But yeah, it really kind of showed in the cemetery which families had the money and which did not.
Yeah. Well, and you go to some places where cemeteries maybe were segregated, and you can, you know, you can definitely see, yeah.
Yeah, I think you see some of that up in, what's that, the town of north of Bellingham, of the Canadian border.
Blaine?
No, it's a Norwegian town.
Oh, Linden.
Linden,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's not Norwegian,
But
that's Dutch.
Yeah, you get some of that up there, where there's kind of a ranking of, you know, who sits where.
Uh-huh.
I've seen denominational cemeteries, is that how common that is? My uncle was buried in a Quaker cemetery. Is that
Yeah.
considered?
I don't know about common, but I can, yeah.
They occur.
That's a US thing too.
My grandmother and grandfather, my grandfather was a German Baptist minister, and they're both buried in Dallas, Oregon, in a cemetery that's strictly for Baptist ministers.
Hmm.
And their spouse.
Let's, you know, cemeteries are really interesting to see in terms of, you know, how they have to work around whatever the, you know, the local condition. And so again, our thoughts about death and dying, caring for the dead and so on, there, as much as there are theological implications of things, and you see that very richly in this God's Acre. You know, had the Moravians settled in New Orleans, they might have thought differently.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, I've heard, I have a friend who lives in New Orleans and talks about exactly why everything is above ground there, and also why there are gates across some of those crypts, because anytime the cemetery floods, the bodies are gonna go floating down the street.
Yeah, so why are they above ground?
Because if you dig down, the hole's full of water. Like instantaneous.
Right.
It's like the water table is right there just below the grass. So if you were to dig down, I mean, it's a nasty mess, and then you end up contaminating groundwater. So you've got to keep everything up above ground.
How do you keep the body down in the hole, even if you dig
Right.
through all the water?
So giant concrete slab.
Yeah.
In Haiti, they're all above ground also.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because of water though.
Where?
I don't know,
In Haiti.
it could be, there may be some kind of influence of Haitian religion on that, because I mean, that's also connected with Norway as well, so.
Well, and actually there's a kind of a, what I was reading is kind of a Spanish influence of all things. And if you go to places in Central America, you'll see a lot of you know, cemeteries where the bodies are above ground. I want to kind of highlight this, like this structure here. That's a big, what do you, yeah, body condominium kind of thing. It looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, quite a few people there. I don't know the scale here. if those are full size for coffins, or for, like a niche or something like that for urns. Just out of curiosity, have any of you, been to a service where, there's like a, where you've gone to the graveside and there's a mausoleum that somebody put into a mausoleum? Have you ever done one of those? Yeah.
I have my sister was in the military, and so Tahoma has these walls
Yeah, those are.
there where ashes can be
Oh, okay.
stored in like that.
Uh-huh.
But not really. There are other structures there on that same ground, so they cater to a lot of different, because my parents were there too, because my dad was in the military.
I did one service that had, with a mausoleum. Well, maybe a couple. There was one where we actually, they actually slid the coffin in while we were there. The other one, we just had the service there and they came back later and did it. But the other one, the family wanted that. And, well, I'll tell you, it's really, I can still kind of hear the noise because the coffin was made, like probably some sort of aluminum or something like that, metal. And, they put BBs down or little ball bearings, right? So it slides in easier. Kind of like you put, cornmeal down below your bread or something, so they put that down and that the sound of that, sliding in. But anyway, yeah. All right, let me go back here. Oh, you're not seeing where I'm switching around. I switched to where people could see you or later in the recording. All right, so yeah, you were talking about flooding, and well, there you go. Yeah, they passed a law, I believe it was within the last 10 years, that I don't know if it's all of Louisiana or New Orleans area, that they have to put the name on the coffin.
On the coffin.
The church I had in Whatcom County has their own cemetery. And it's about a half a block away from the church, so it's not on the church.
Yeah.
But it's also near the Nooksack River. And the stories go that sometimes when the Nooksack flooded, in the old times especially, some of the coffins would go floating.
Yeah.
Now, whether those were just stories, I don't know.
Yeah. Can you imagine seeing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you don't have to imagine it, yeah, seeing it live. So here is, you're talking about like, space, and this is Europe, Hallstatt, Austria. And you get kind of an idea that that church is built up, that's a Catholic church built up on the whole town built on a mountainside, basically. And I don't have a picture of the cemetery, but you go in there, there's very little land. And there's no like parking or anything. I don't know how old this is, so there's no real place to park. The roads are really narrow and so on. But you can walk up to the church, and there's a churchyard around, full of graves. They use a lot of wood there. That's the material that it's pretty handy as far as putting up different markers and things. They bury a body for 15 years. And then after 15 years, they exhume the body, they take the bones. Family members have the opportunity. They can either, sometimes they'll bleach the skeleton, the bones in, chemicals, or they'll send it out for nature. And they will take the larger bones. I'm not familiar with my anatomy, but femur, is that a big bone?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever, at least femurs, whatever else, they take big bones. And you can see that they put them all. This ossuary is sort of almost like a cave-like thing that you can enter into. They take the skulls, and some of them are decorated. Family member would go through and decorate them. The symbols that they have, well, there's some wreaths. I don't see. Some of them have snakes on them. I'm not really sure exactly what the symbols in there, but. Yeah, anyway, and So that's kind of an interesting setup. It's similar in, Jesus to time, right? Those tombs that they have were not meant for one body, not single occupancy forever. But the body would be there for a period of time, lying there on a shelf. And after nature had done its thing, for a while, they would go back and take the bones in the same fashion. It might keep some of the larger bones, I believe. You help me out here.
I think right outside of the walled city of Jerusalem, between Jerusalem itself and Mount of Olives, there's a huge cemetery.
Yeah.
From what I was told, people who are buried there are not buried there permanently.
Oh,
But
okay.
the bones are taken out, and I don't know what they've done, but there's only X number of years that they're there.
Oh, okay.
And that cemetery plot then is used by somebody else for
Oh.
a period of time. So, yeah, one space is an
Yeah.
issue.
So maybe they have a boneyard at
Yeah,
somewhere where they mix
yeah, I-
Potentially,
things
yeah.
together. or-
I don't really remember. So,
Yeah, I can see the practicality of needing to do that for space. and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yeah,
But I'm wondering what meaning decorating a skull would have. I don't get that.
Yeah, I'm
You
not
could
sure.
recognize it. Yeah.
Well, you could recognize it, sure.
Identification.
Yeah,
Identification.
It's the one with,
yeah. In the upper right here, you can see the see those lines in red, those are Bibles. And the skulls on top of those Bibles are priests. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's pretty creepy at first, but then it's sort of like, I don't know. Sit there for a little bit, it feels, I wouldn't want to spend the night there. But it feels different. Doesn't feel as quite as morbid, I think, as my American sensibilities would lend itself to. Here's one that's a little closer to home. This is the Shoreline, and if you've been to is it Northwest Cancer Center that's right across the street from this? Yeah, I went there. Cynthia Eisenberger was having a procedure done, and Bill and I kind of hung out with Bill, and we went across the street and walked through this cemetery. It's really amazing. It's huge. It's really amazing. So there's a section in there for war dead. A lot of those were from the Spanish-American War. And
The
you know,
Russian Orthodox or the crosses, they're
Right.
there too.
yeah, you see some different sections there. There's a Jewish section, an Orthodox section. The newer, there's a lot of Asian. You can see the upper right there of kind of a, I don't know if it's kind of a pagoda-like. I don't know what that is exactly, mausoleum or something. But yeah, you really get a sense of the different areas that are there, and so on. But more and more, this is what we see. Forest Lawn Memorial Gardens, wherever that might be. Forest Lawn Memorial Gardens could be anywhere, right? It's a pretty bland kind of name. Sounds a lot better, I suppose, than a graveyard or boneyard. And if you look out, if it wasn't for people that had put flowers there, it would look like a park. A memorial garden. All the headstones there are flat, right, surface ones. So it's easier to take care of, right? Just run the mower through there and so on. And again, if we compare that with the first images, the churchyard, that says a lot about what, our views about death and dying and so on. What's the name of the cemetery that's over by the landfill? Ocean View, yeah. I mean, you go there, it's great view and things like that. But it's also kind of a ways from things.
You also used to look over the dump.
You used to look over the dump?
No,
Well, that's
the-
right.
There
Actual
were,
approach.
there were caskets that fell down the
Oh, no.
hill because it eroded.
Oh. You get your money back if that happens?
You have
What do
to
they
pay
do?
for a replanting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a retrieval.
Yeah.
Well, that whole thing's gonna go when we have a tsunami.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's like,
I've been afraid of
it's
that.
guaranteed, like at some point you're gonna go for a swim.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if it's-
How did we get here? Here could be,
Mm,
you know, this memorial garden, or, this is actually a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can have a QR
Yeah.
code on a headstone,
Mhm.
and you scan it with your phone, and it pulls up whatever it is that the family wanted to.
It's so anchored in time though, I mean, because the instant we find something other than QR code, people are not gonna be able to read that.
Yeah,
There's a thing called encryption through obsolescence, and that's waiting for.
so, how did we get to that idea? From some of the things I've read, one big influence in America was the Civil War. You know, deadliest war, and nation had dealt with a lot of death. So some of their attitudes, I think people had on some level had enough. And so it was part of the trend of, well, and also what do you do with all the bodies? And so there are different elements that were happening kind of simultaneously. Urban growth is another piece. Matt, you've been to, well, Boston's where we started. And you know, if you go to Boston, like Old North Church and some of those areas, I mean, there's, you know, high rises and things that are all right there. There's a premium on property. So as that you know, came about, then you know, churches were squeezed on some levels, and there were rising costs associated with that. I mean, think about the maintenance, record keeping, and the maintenance and things like that of a cemetery. You know, you see that today. There are cemeteries that if they weren't managed properly, you know, fall into kind of some decay. You know, is there anyone around to take care of it into perpetuity and things like that? So rising costs, the whole funeral industry too, a change of that, and more there are cemeteries. You mentioned like a denominational cemetery. There are municipal ones, but more and more there are cemeteries that are run by funeral outfits. Dignity Memorial's huge. Caskets and whatever,
Is that
so,
a franchise?
yeah.
Really? Why?
And social mobility was another element of it as well. You know, that changes a lot in terms of, even like with burials, you know, that you know, used to be people wanted to have a funeral right away. And there were some practical concerns about that, and they're still on, like Jewish custom is you bury somebody, and I think Muslim as well, within a day. In Alaska, you might have to wait. You know, they'll put the body on ice until the thaw, and they can dispose of it. But as people move around, the idea of having a family plot, you know, a place at the churchyard or something like that, those, you know, that's kind of changed attitudes as well. We see a lot more cremations, and a lot more cremations out west. And I think part of that is because, you know, when people are closer to home, where, you know, kind of as a nation, our roots are more to the east. It's one thing to bury somebody, but the attitudes, you know, change the further you come out to the west. And having served in 3 churches in 3 different time zones, I can tell you that there are very different attitudes about death and dying and burial and so on. And then religious pluralism is another aspect of it. If you're in an area where you see more and more people that are being cremated, then, you know, that's part of your mindset when you have a loved one. It used to be the idea of cremation was pretty taboo.
Yeah.
You know, what is God? You need to have a body for God to resurrect it. And how's that going to work with ashes and so on? But what are some other, help me out with that, Stan? Is that pretty accurate as far as, you know, the cremation piece, or?
Yeah, I think so.
I think part of it's also a thought about a lot of environmentalism stuff too, just I mean, I've met a lot of people that said, I just don't want to take up a bunch of space, like, you know, not from a money standpoint, but just from a caring for the earth kind of standpoint.
Yeah, more and more, right.
And you can technically be buried in a pot with a tree, and after you're dead, your ashes will help grow the tree. So there are industries that are starting to look at you repurposing different earth-related items.
You can't just, if somebody dies, just bury them on your property. Is that against the law?
Yeah, I believe it is. against the law.
Well, I have a
What do you
friend-
think?
I have a friend who set up, I guess you have to set up, I don't know the legal documents you have to be able to obtain, but he was able, he lost his wife and his grandson in an automobile accident, and he set up a memorial and actually has a burial plot on its place.
Yeah, you probably have to get some sort of
Maybe official.
Yeah, yeah.
permitting or something for that.
Well, nothing on the land use level, I think it's just state.
Oh, okay.
But as far as cremation goes, there's no restrictions in this state anyway, in terms of distributing those ashes.
So
Yeah.
you can go freely.
Yeah.
Well, with the exception of water burials, there are guidelines on how you go about that, where you go about that. Because you have to be,
We weren't told.
my father, I took my father-in-law 3 miles out to see before we could actually put him in water.
We weren't told.
Yeah,
Yeah, my mom and dad both had their ashes distributed off the back of my dad's favorite ferry. My dad worked for Washington State Ferries for almost 50 years. And they did a nice little ceremony for us on the ferry. And there was no permitting or anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. How long ago was that? I mean,
2004.
yeah, see, we just took my father-in-law in 2017, I think.
So Genesis ashes or a body?
It was ashes and a specially designed wooden box that sinks after 15 minutes. It just gradually sinks down. And they said we had to be at least 3 miles from shore.
well, maybe there's a more permanence to a box, I suppose, right? Because it's not gonna disintegrate right away as opposed to if ashes
It's
are
just
gonna
a box
spread.
full of ashes,
Yeah.
But yeah,
So in other words, if you're closer in, it's gonna wash up on shore, somebody's gonna
it
see
was
it.
still designed to sink,
Yeah,
but yeah, I could.
well, 15 minutes of current, I don't know, so.
I'm sure a lot of things happen that they don't know anything about the rules, so that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of people just do what they're gonna do.
Well, different states have different rules. When we lived in Buffalo, you couldn't even bury your animals on your own property.
Oh.
There were actual pet cemeteries that you had to bury your animals in.
Speaking of which,
If the answer to this is not yes, we're gonna have some
So-
problems. I'm just saying.
so yeah, I want to get into what some of the things that we see in scripture that either might clarify or muddy it for us. And for that, I think we're gonna need some Bibles, unless you have them on your phone, but just kind of get some of these out there. Okay. But yeah, so the picture here, you see the one kid on his phone accessing this tomb. There's their video tombstones. I don't know. Looks like maybe that's something that started more in Europe. There's a pet headstone there, and then the Steelers. I mean, just the idea that people have always, I think, put together things that they love, and you see somebody as a football and
When I was a child, grade school, I had already read through the scriptures. And I had a dog that had died. And in Book of Revelation, it says the dogs will be outside the gate. not knowing that that was not a good thing. I took it very literally,
Yeah.
that the dog, and my dog was always outside, so it was never an indoor dog.
Huh.
So I thought it was perfect, that my dog would be there.
He was waiting for you.
He was waiting.
All right, so here's some scripture passages that we can kind of take a look at. I am of the, I'll just kind of come out, put my cards out there. I'm of the belief that there's a lot of mystery. I don't particularly focus too much on what heaven is like, exactly. But anyway, I pulled up a few passages. It's not exhaustive exactly, but it's something to kind of get us thinking and talking a little bit. I mean, I have some ideas about what heaven is like and everything, but I just think that, let me put it this way. I think it's just different than what I hear a lot of times when people get up and speak at a funeral. Well, Joe's doing what he loves now. He's fishing every day, and catching the big ones and that kind of thing. Okay, well, all right. So maybe just somebody can pick a passage here, and somebody want to look up the John 14 passage, and we'll see what that.
I have a,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going.
So what do we think about that? What's Jesus saying?
Jesus.
Yeah, we'll be with Jesus.
And there's lots of room.
There's lots of room for us all. For us all.
We don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about
And yet, I've only met a few people, very few, probably in one hand, who would say in their dying process, or the families afterward would always talk about the fact that when they die, they'll be with their loved ones.
Yep.
I've only known with one hand those who say, when I die, I will be with Jesus.
Oh.
It's always loved ones.
Yeah.
It's just interesting.
Why is that, you think?
Everybody's going somewhere. Someplace.
Yeah, and I think the proximity of the loved one versus Jesus, you can't see now.
Uh,
I mean,
Hmm.
Maybe it's because we haven't, but maybe we haven't really fallen in love with Jesus.
Yeah.
Versus fallen in love with somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's a more accurate census. We're gonna, heaven is, we're in the presence of God, and I think of things that matter to us now, I don't think are gonna matter so much.
I also, I've heard that one, and what I glean from it is he's going there to prepare it for us. It's almost, I guess in my mind, I think, well, doesn't heaven already exist? What, is it cluttered? Does he have to clean up? But no, and I almost think that there's almost an element of personability about it. Like I'm gonna prepare this for you.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, and I think you're right on. It's like, what does it matter what we conjure in our minds in terms of what it's gonna be? It'll be created by God. It'll be a piece that we don't yet understand. And it's gonna be the things we've craved all our lives without even knowing what we're craving.
I think this always confused me, like, I know that when I was younger, I was thinking, okay, he's gonna prepare a place for me.
Yeah.
Good. And now with other people saying different things, like, into your family, or, be with your friends and everything. Then that led me to believe, like, not believe, but what to call it,
Consider.
what is going to happen.
Oh.
So then I go back to a room for me. So it's always, that's where I want to be, is a room for me. Pretend place, because that's a verse that I think about. It says, a room, a place for you.
I'm guessing that I think the you is probably plural there too, right?
I was kind of wondering if there's maybe a translational lack of clarity in that, in those words, as far as how we understand that.
Well, and that's a good question. And I think there's some element, as we've seen in John the last several weeks, that, Jesus is trying to explain these eternal things, spiritual things in earthly terms. And there's a song, God, who does the song? Come and go with me to my Father's house. Come and go with me to my Father's. It's a big house, lots and lots of room where we can play football, stuff like that. So a lot of youth group kids should probably have that image of heaven. How about Revelation 21, 1-4?
Oh, I got that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away."
Okay. What is that image? What image do we take from that?
I remember heaven used different ways, can refer to the air around us, can refer to the cosmos, can refer, sometimes used to talk about the dwelling place of God. So I see here God coming down. He may not be in heaven at all, we just might be down the block, but God is with us.
Yeah, and the mechanics of it are, that may be specific to the message that John of Patmos had. But I think the idea of the everlasting presence of God and no more pain, suffering, tears. I mean, it's again spoken to people who are in persecution, I think. But I think from that we can draw maybe some, extrapolate some things. Yeah.
It's just interesting to me, and I've never quite understood it. There's a new heaven and a new earth. What does that mean?
Well, and that's a good question. Well, and I wonder if it's the heaven, like you're talking about, the heavens, maybe not heaven as a place. I don't know.
There's creation restored, I think is part of that image too. But I love the
Yeah.
fact that in the last chapter of the Bible, practically, God is still coming.
But also later on in that same chapter, 15, the angel who talked with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city. I look at that as community.
Yeah.
There's a sense that somehow or another we're involved in community.
You know what? Let's take a look ahead to the bottom one here. Just look at Revelation 21, 21 through 27. Somebody read that for us.
And the 12 gates are 12 pearls. Each of the gates is a single pearl, and the street of the city is pure gold, transparent as glass. I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. People will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations. But nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who practices abomination or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life.
What do you recognize in there?
Children's stories.
Okay, well, what, streets paved with gold, pearly gates? I mean, have you ever heard that before, it's a description of heaven? Yeah, yeah. That I think description actually is like the New Jerusalem. But, you know, that's something I think has become kind of popularized, and I wish I could remember the reference. Some of what I'm drawing upon goes back to when I was at seminary in a class that I took about sects and cults in America. Kind of an intriguing title for it, but the idea was sort of like homegrown religions in the US. And one of the lectures was the dying of death. And the professor talked about some of the things I'm talking about here. What I can't remember was that there was a book that was popularized around the late 19th century that really put forward the idea of the pearly gates and the streets paved with gold, that really caught on in American culture at the time, that again fed into the changing view of heaven. You know, the Puritan view of, you know, it's more heaven and hell and, you know, fiery, you know, death and so on. And the idea of streets paved with gold and so on makes heaven becomes like it's almost like an Aristotelian sort of concept that, you know, with right, am I at the right with is it Aristotle with or Platonic rather, Platonic, where there are forms, everything here is like a form, an imperfect form of that which is in heaven. And so that kind of reversed everything so that, you know, we could envision heaven in kind of earthly terms, and everything is just like, it's like here, but just sort of perfect.
And that's where we get, I love when it's fishing.
Right, that's where we get, yeah, exactly, that's where that's exactly where that comes from. And I think it's taking Revelation and so on out of, you know, out of context and things. And those of you in the Discovering the Bible, I think we'll look at that when we get to Revelation a little bit later, but.
But this chapter, these verses though also says that the nations will walk by his light.
Yeah,
What
is that, right?
does that mean?
Well, and I think it's drawing upon some images of, in the Old Testament, that Jerusalem is always meant to be as a seed of God, that it's going to be, Jerusalem itself would be a light to the nations. And so, and we're just getting more into Revelation, but to people who are persecuted, it's a message of hope, right? You know, that one day Jerusalem will be restored as a light to the nations, and it will, you know, essentially fulfill its purpose. You know, new heaven and new earth and so on. I want to take a look at Matthew 22. Again, as we're talking about the idea of our, you know, seeing loved ones, being with loved ones in heaven, that sort of thing. What does Jesus say there? Matthew 22, 23 through 33.
I got that one.
Yeah.
The same day, some Sadducees came to him saying, there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies childless, his brother shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died childless, leaving the widow to his brother. The second did the same, so also the third, down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman herself died. And Jesus answered them, you are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is God not of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astounded at his teaching.
I'm not sure I understand exactly what all that means. But, the Sadducees raised a very particular question, practical question, right? I mean, they, seven brothers, I mean, really, but it is kind of a practical sort of question that they raised. Sadducees, by the way, did not believe in the resurrection, that the Pharisees did. Or bodily resurrection at least, but I wanted to put that in to kind of muddy the waters a little bit in terms of, what we try to do envisioning heaven really always starts a lot with our now, with what we know, and that's what we base off of. And I think if we can hold on some level, the idea of like, well, maybe I don't have to worry about some of these things, maybe that I will love and enjoy being in the presence of God. And that will be enough. I don't know the questions about do pets, make it to heaven? What about a relationship? What if I see this person that I just didn't get along with in life? How's that going to be? All those kinds of things. I don't know.
Seems like light and life are sort of constant throughout a
Yeah.
lot of the descriptions.
Yeah.
Light and life. There used to be a radio show called Light and Life. And they talk about heaven, but they probably were in reality,
Well, as I said, I think a lot of our images of heaven, the afterlife, and things are shaped by the things that we see, around us. And I just wanted to kind of prime the pump for the rest of the class here to get us kind of thinking a little bit. Maybe you can do your own reflection. You might come back with your own scriptures and things that speak to you. We only had a chance to see a few of them. You can. I didn't break any handouts or anything like that, but if you want to look at the Romans or the Hebrews passages, you're certainly welcome to do that. But we're out of time, and I want to wrap this up. We didn't begin with prayer. Let's close with prayer, though. Well, loving God, thank you for this discussion, and thank you that the things that we've talked about here are fully, entirely in your hands. So I pray that we, as we contemplate, can do so without worry, trusting in you, in your grace, and your mercy. That you who dwell among us have a place for us that is secure in you, that we can trust to you, starting with now. We pray in Jesus' name.